It is the midway point of the Big Ten season for the men's basketball team. So, no better time to welcome in a special guest, Dustin Dopirak of the Bloomington Herald-Times, to talk about where the Hoosiers have been, how far they've come, and also a little bit of talk about the football program today. Special episode today for you guys.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Hoosiers? It is Thursday, February 3rd. This, as always, is your daily one-stop shop for all IU athletics news, analysis, previews, and recaps. Locked On Hoosiers here for you guys every day. I'm your host, as always, Jacob Rude. I want to thank you guys for making us part of your day and for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every day. Reminder, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where we premiere the episodes at 7 a.m. so you guys can all join in together watching as part of your morning routine. Those will be on YouTube live every morning at 7 a.m. Special episode, as we said, welcoming in Dustin Dopirak, Bloomington Herald-Times basketball, football beat writer. He's been around the program, the entire IU athletics program for quite a while, so certainly will bring a lot of perspective to this season. Before we jump into that interview, though, as always, you can subscribe to Locked On Hoosiers wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Hoosiers or on Instagram at Locked On Hoosiers. Without further ado, let's throw it to the interview. And now we are joined by Dustin Dopirak of the Bloomington Herald-Times. Been at a lot of places covering IU throughout the years. Dustin, thanks a ton for coming on. How you doing today?
Doing good, Jacob. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you stopping by to talk about what's been a really fun IU basketball season, which there haven't been a lot of those in recent years, and it's been a joy to watch this team, specifically kind of looking back to last weekend, that Maryland game. We talked about it at the time, but to me, it felt like one of the best performances of the season. Obviously, that Purdue game is probably going to be the best performance of the season, but having kind of watched that game and now that we've had some time to digest it, I mean, to me, it felt like the team kind of turned the corner a bit in that game. Is that a sense you kind of got from that contest?
To an extent. I mean, obviously, I think there's more. There's still a lot more hurdles left, and there's still some games. I mean, I don't think you can look at that game and say, "Man, they got it all right now. They're going to roll." That's not how a Big Ten season works generally. I mean, you're going to have ups and downs, and it's not a schedule that you're just going to sprint right through unless you're really, really, really good. Unless you're a team that ends up being a top seed and is a Final Four contender. I mean, generally, you're still. With a team like Indiana that I think still has flaws. I mean, there are still going to be, some bumps in the road coming up. It's not all going to be that way. But I think to go from just sort of the change in dynamic from Purdue to Michigan, when that week there was just so much emotion there, just so much high, and then just sort of a crashing low after that against Michigan. And I think that's kind of how it had to be. I mean, against Purdue, I think they had to really, really get up for it. I don't think they win that game if they're not playing a little bit out of their shoes, if they're not playing with their hair on fire, if they're not riding the emotional wave. I don't know that that's a team that you can beat. Like you have to be, on a 10, and it's probably going to take you just playing a little bit with your hair on fire, and then having kind of an emotional crash after that, like that kind of comes with the territory. I think when you win some of those games, if you sometimes beat a team that is more talented than you and you expend all of that, not just physical energy, but emotional energy to win a game like that, you're probably going to have a downturn to some extent. They obviously had one against Michigan, but I think they recognized a lot of things there. I mean, I think number one, it was like, okay, we just did this. That is exactly what happened. We played out of our shoes one night, and then we came back and we were sort of out of gas and spent for the next one for a team that is not that much better than Indiana. I thought played really well. I thought Michigan is a different team when they're firing on all cylinders. Obviously, they haven't been very good this year, but when you get Caleb Houston shooting threes and you get Daeh producing and Hunter Dickinson is really, really really good, they can be a really tough out, and they were a pretty tough matchup for Indiana. But I think these last two games, Penn State and Maryland both, and particularly Maryland, just showed some emotional maturity, showed them getting past an emotionally draining week, and then sort of rediscovering themselves and getting back to being able to play on a level. It's tough to go on the road anywhere. Maryland is a tough enough environment. I mean, I wouldn't call it one of the top 3 or 4 most hostile places in the Big Ten, but people are there. It's a big enough crowd, and when they're good, they can really care. They hadn't beaten Maryland in College Park since Maryland joined the Big Ten in 2015. They hadn't played since 1934. Indiana last beat them in College Park in 1934, but it never won in that building. So it is a game that matters, and I think it showed. Blueprint might be overstating the case, but it kind of proved that there are teams in the Big Ten that Indiana can outmuscle and just decide to beat in the paint. I mean, it was 36-20 in the paint. Indiana really didn't have an answer for Trayce Jackson-Davis or Race Thompson, and Indiana defended Maryland's best guys. I mean, Trey Galloway really took Eric Ayala out of that game. Xavier Johnson pretty much snuffed out Fats Russell, more or less. So there was adherence to the game plan. There was smart overall play. Good defense and toughness, and they were just in control really after they fell behind 8-0 out of the break, out of the game, or out of the start of the game, off of tip. I think they followed that with like an 11-13-0 run after that, and they were in control the rest of the way. And it's tough to go control a game on the road. Now, I didn't think Maryland played well. Maryland had to ask itself a lot of questions after they got that game, and obviously they gave Michigan State some trouble last night. So there's some. Other teams have ups and downs too, and Indiana managed to catch Maryland on a down day. But all the same, catching them on a down day and punishing them for it is, I think, a thing that a mature team does. And I think Indiana's getting there. They're still not, these guys haven't, all won together. Their current combinations are different than they've ever been. Their point guard is new to them. They're 3 of their starting 5 are new guys this year. Significant parts of their bench are new. It is still a team that's figuring out how to win. It hasn't been to an NCAA tournament together, even though it deserved to go 2 years ago. Trayce Jackson-Davis, Race Thompson, Rob Finney, those guys deserve to have one on their belt. It's just because of COVID that they don't. But all the same, they have not been there. They haven't witnessed that. They don't know what that's like. So there is a lot that they're still learning how to do. And there is signs that they're learning how to do it.
Yeah, maturity is a word I like, because I thought those Penn State and Maryland games were just that. Those were 2 games. The Hoosiers were better than their opponent, and they took control of the game in both contests and won both of them. And you mentioned just the learning how to win. I kind of compare a lot of the recent performances. If you look back to those Syracuse game, the Wisconsin game, and how things kind of got out of hand at times in those games, and how the Hoosiers let them get away, and you compare it to some of their recent wins. Is this a group that you think is learning kind of how to win now later in the season?
I think it is. I think there's a few pieces to it. There's definitely a learning what has to happen. Sometimes you got to get burned to figure it out. Sometimes you have to lose a game. You have to crumple at the end and look back and see what you did wrong and say, okay, we'll never do that again. But it's sometimes it's just sort of maintaining a mental toughness and saying like, okay, like we can't get frustrated this way. We can't start forcing things. We can't start panicking. And I think you saw signs of that. I for whatever reason I wasn't in a position to watch the Wisconsin game really, so I only caught bits and pieces of that of what went wrong there. But obviously you saw Iowa that they just sort of stumbled to the end. Syracuse was just nuts. That was just a wild basketball game. In the hundreds, everybody was just chucking it up, and at some point someone was going to make the last shot. But Iowa, obviously, just the turnovers against the press. They were beating it earlier, and they just stopped. They just reached a point where they were having a hard time getting the ball across the timeline. Then saying, okay, obviously not as many teams in the Big Ten press like Iowa does. Not many like to play at that pace. But they've burned that in the past. They've beaten Iowa in the past trying to do that, and for those guys to fall apart against that, was just like, what are you guys doing? So I think they figured some things out there. I think a big key to it, a big reason why they're a different team, and what I think allows them to be able to put a team away and allows them to not get scorched by somebody, is Trey Galloway. I think is a really big piece defensively, especially. I mean, he helps on offense. There's things he does well as far as creating off the bounce. But a big thing is that it makes it harder for, like Johnny Davis would not have had as easy a day if Trey Galloway's in the game. Buddy Boeheim doesn't have as easy of a day if Trey Galloway's in the game. Because I think he's given them a guy that's been, I think, really the missing piece on defense, where they've been pretty good defensively all year, but they haven't had a guy who really handles 2s and 3s well, where you have Race Thompson who can really handle a playmaking 4, and EJ Liddell, something like that. Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to have the edge most nights at the 5. Sometimes he won't, but for the most part, he does that well, and he's going to be able to protect the rim as well. You've got at least somebody there in the back that's going to be able to usually challenge something that comes up at the rim. But and they've had Xavier Johnson and Rob Finney, who have been good at just defending lead guards, dribble penetration, that sort of thing. And they're okay if you put them both on the floor, one of those guys taking it too. They're okay at that. But when you've got a sort of bigger 6'4", 6'5" kind of guy, who can score from outside and from inside, 3-level guys, the Johnny Davis of the world, the Jaden Ivies of the world. They really didn't have anybody who really fit that assignment. And Trey Galloway does, because he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the tenacity. He can run through screens if you're making him, just run laps around, staggered screens. Like Trey Galloway can survive that and come out on the other side better than anybody on the team, I think. And so you look back at the Ivy performance, we really watched that game out of the buckets Ivy had. I mean, Ivy still had 21, but only, I think maybe 3 of them come when Galloway's on the floor. And one of them comes when he gets, they switched up, put Geronimo on him, and Ivy just blew by Geronimo. And another when Galloway just gets leveled by a screen. So he's like basically not by the play. Basically he gets trapped and there's no way of him getting back to Ivy. There's just too big of a body in between him and nobody really switches and picks it up. Like Ivy just manages to get downhill. There's only one shot that Ivy goes over top of Galloway for. And so that's a big reason why Ivy doesn't take that game over. In the second half and in the first half, I mean, Galloway drove him absolutely nuts to the point where Ivy just shoves him. And that's, like Ivy's got some fire, but like, that's a mature kid. That's a good dude. That's a son of a coach. Like his mom is, like his mom is in charge of one of the most important programs in women's college basketball, was an NBA coach. You're not looking at a hothead. Jaden Ivey got driven crazy by Trey Galloway. That was very out of character. And that tells you that Galloway gets in people and drives them nuts. And that allows you to be a team that can close. If you can keep an explosive 2-guard like Jaden Ivey from taking it away from you, you can close games. And so Galloway gives them that piece. I mean, they were already really good, but that's that last spot that they didn't have. Parker Stewart and Miller Kopp, as good of shooters as they are, just on the defensive end, they're not those guys. Miller, they can both chase around a shooter like a Sasha Stefanovic, which they did really well in that game. I think Sasha was 1 for 7, but a guy who can beat you off the dribble and score over top of you requires a certain kind of defender, and Trey Galloway is that kind of defender. And again, that allows you to close a game at home or on the road in ways that I don't think they were able to before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to keep talking about Trey Galloway and the guards as a whole here right after this break. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs, all the way to the big game in a couple weeks. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, news, and more this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. It's Super Week, brought to you by GetUpside, and there's no better place to get coverage of the big game than the Locked On NFL podcasts. Locked On NFL, Locked On Bengals, Locked On Rams, all are going to be in LA all week covering the big game. So be sure to check those guys out. Now back to our conversation. Maybe I'm speaking for myself alone here, but I did not put quite as much stock maybe as I should have at Trey Galloway's absence at the beginning of the year. He goes down in that St. John's game, obviously, and he missed a good chunk of time. Comes back, though, and really just hit the ground running. There was no easing in process or anything like that, and comes back in that Ohio State game and is making big plays to help them get that win. And as you said, he's been a huge factor in this team since he's been back in Big Ten play, on the defensive side of the ball, creating havoc. I know that's a football buzzword, but getting steals and things like that. And I think he's kind of signified a bit of a shift here, is just the improved guard play overall. I know early in the season there was a lot of talk about the guards maybe holding this team back a little bit, but as we get deeper into Big Ten play with Trey Galloway, with Xavier Johnson, with Finney before he was hurt, how much are we seeing these guards improve now?
Oh, no, a lot. I mean, I think it's a very different group than it was before, and it's a dynamic that had to figure itself out and still is. I mean, I think you're still, like so some of the rest of the guys have come down while those guys have gone up. I mean, if I would have told you in late November, early December that it's a matter of time before Tamar Bates is in the starting five, I would have said that's a lock, that he is, because I mean, from a skill set level, he's the best 3-level scorer. Like when you just, again, looking at pedigree, what he's been all of his life, he's the one guy that you can imagine just being able to get his own and score either in the pull-up game from 3 or going to the rim. And he just hasn't scored at all. I mean, he's just hit a tough patch where he's just having a hard time getting the ball to go in the hole, and he hasn't risen as fast. And I don't think he's hopeless at all. I mean, I think at some point he's going to pull out of it. It won't be the freshman year that I think he hoped and had reason to believe that he could have, but he can still play himself, I think, into being a really good player next year. I mean, I would not be shocked if at some point, Tamar Bates is an all Big Ten guy and ends up being an NBA guy. I don't think that's out of the question still. It's just a slump, and it's an extended one. But it's, initially sort of he had a different role, and obviously Galloway was hurt for a while. And I think Xavier Johnson obviously he's always been a high risk, high reward guy. And I think he sort of had to figure out who he had to be for this team, and how he had to change, and how he had to sort of complete himself as a guard. I think Finney's mostly been, he's obviously had games where he's shot it better. He's been more steady than not. But the games where he proved that he could shoot the basketball were really, really important. Obviously, Minnesota was basically begging him to shoot threes. Yep. I mean, they were just giving him 6, 7, 8, 10 feet and saying, Rob, we don't believe you're going to hit this. Take all the time you'd like. Go ahead. And then he drilled it in their eye 4 or 5 times. And then Purdue, it wasn't exactly the same, but they were saying, okay, well, we're not playing over top screens for you. We're going to sit there and drop, and we're going to dare you to shoot those. And he's like, well, I'll take those too if you'll give them to me, no problem. But from a defensive standpoint, he's been pretty solid. Decision making, I think, been more aggressive off the bounce for most this year. But I think Johnson really had to figure himself out, figure out how to still be aggressive and play under control. And that's a tough balance to walk. It's a tough line because, I mean, he's always, because really those two guys have had the opposite problems, where Finney has been very risk averse, not tried to turn the ball over, been really, focused on that, but doesn't end up making enough plays. And Johnson is a guy who makes a lot of plays. He's clearly the fastest guy with the basketball, most explosive guy, getting downhill off the dribble, able to create in ways nobody on the team can, but sometimes gets around the rim and throws up something wild, or misses an opportunity at a kick out, or tries to force a pass that isn't there. He, I think, is seeing the floor better, shooting it a little bit better, finishing, I think, better. And I think that's really important, is that he's getting there, getting his feet under him, getting under control when he goes to the rim, and getting something that, he just seems to have more of a plan as to where he's trying to put the ball off the backboard. And just, instead of just going with just straight raw aggression and just trusting that if you put it near there, it's going to go in. There is a sense when he goes up, I think now, of, all right, how do I play off contact? Is this guy going to hit me? And if he does, where do I go with the basketball so that it goes in? And I think he's figured that piece out. And I think that's really important. I mean, he's such a key X factor for this team. Just if you can trust him to get points, get assists, move the ball the right way, not turn it over, the ceiling goes up for them a whole lot. And he's been able to do that. With Galloway to go, I mean, you mentioned just not realizing how big of a deal it was going to be. I mean, I think what's happened, I mean, like you saw good flashes from him last year. And if you'd followed his, if you followed his career in high school, he was a guy that really cared about defense, did a lot of smart things, is a coach's son, it was a winner at Culver. And so there was going to be something like that there, but there's a difference from a guy being a pretty good defensive guy to a guy being able to take on the assignment. That's an extra step, and it's tough for a freshman to do, and for a sophomore even that had missed a lot of time. I mean, that's tough to throw him in. And if you I went back and watched some of the film to just get a sense of who else, because his Ivy performance stood out to me. His performance against Ayala really stood out to me. I was like, well, who else did he guard? And it took a while for Indiana obviously to determine that he should get bigger assignments. I mean, he a lot of time in the Ohio State game when he came back, he's on Justin Ahrens, and that's important because Justin Ahrens can burn you from three, but he's not taking it to you. He is sitting back and he's waiting for threes. I mean, he's probably, 90% of his shots in his college career have been from three, probably something along those lines, at least 80. But Galloway can do more than that. Iowa, I mean, he had some time on Jordan Bohannon, but mostly it was like Aaron Eulis and Connor McCaffrey. And so it's not that they didn't challenge him, but they didn't, I think, notice that he can go get the big dog. And I think that was, Bryce McGowan's was, I think, a guy that he sort of started with. I mean, Parker Stewart, you could see that was going to be a tough assignment for him. And they started throwing Galloway on him and he made a difference. And then Ivy, I think, was really the notion that the time where I think the staff said, Trey's the guy for this, when you're figuring out scouting reports and saying who needs to be the guy that's guarding the guy on the perimeter. It took them a while to figure out that it's Galloway, but I think they've figured it out lately that it's Galloway. Again, Johnson and Finney are big pieces to this. And, when it's a point guard, those guys are more than qualified. But when it's between Galloway or Stewart or Kopp or even Bates, Galloway is the clear option now at this point.
Yeah. And he's been, I mean, it's no coincidence that since he's come back, the Hoosiers are 6-2. With a number of big wins mixed in there. So he's been enormous. And I mean, it's wild to think that we're 20 minutes into the podcast and haven't even really mentioned Trayce Jackson-Davis either, who obviously is, you almost run out of superlatives to describe him at this point in his career. I mean, when you kind of look at it big picture with him, how much has he kind of helped his legacy at IU coming back this year and having this season that he's having?
No, a lot. I mean, and I think it's one of those things where because the NBA stock isn't moving as much as you would have thought. I mean, I don't think he's in an interesting position. I don't think it's a stone cold lock that he leaves after this year, because as much as he was talking about it like this is one more year, it's a good class. And it's tough to break through as the type of guy he is, as a 6'9" guy who, hasn't necessarily expanded his range the way I think that you would hope. But as far as winning basketball games, doing stuff that's important for Indiana, he keeps getting better. And even as a sophomore, I mean, I think, that there is this narrative that Woodson has improved him in a way that Archie Miller never could. And he has pushed him in ways that Archie didn't. But I thought he made big strides from year 1 to year 2. And now he's making bigger strides from year 2 to year 3. I think, he's been allowed to go block shots, and I think that's added an element to his game and made him a force. He blocked shots before, but he was never allowed to leave his guy to go do it. That's one thing that Trayce told us when we asked him about it before is basically that, he would get blocks when the ball would get down in the paint on his guy and in some rotations, but mostly it was, if your guy's down in the low block, you don't leave him because, you might just give up an easy layup that way. But it's like Woodson's looked at it as, if you can aggressively go after that shot, you can pin it off the backboard and we're better off. And we also have other guys that can come behind you if you have to. You know, a Trayce Thompson or Jordan Geronimo in particular can come, you know, block if your guy gets the ball, you know, if they pass around you. But he's added that piece. He's become, I think, a better passer. I think he's still sort of figuring that part out, but I think he's much better out of a double team of figuring out where the open guy is and whipping it out to him and getting it, you know, on time and on target to get somebody a shot. But I mean, he's still, you know, really good scorer. I think he's getting better with the right hand, at least, even though, again, he's not taking shots a lot outside. He's still proving, again, when he gets the ball around the block, it is so tough to stop him. And, you know, now, you know, especially if he plays in a tournament, which I presume that they will. I mean, I don't see a collapse coming. And he's part of Mike Woodson's beginning. You know, for one thing, I mean, I think he was critical to keeping a lot of other pieces around, in particular, Trayce Thompson. But, you know, I think really got a lot of guys on board. And I think you're going to look at, you know, especially even the press conference he gave and some of the speeches he gave and the ways in which he embraced leadership in the wake of this coaching transition, that it is going to be that writes him into the lore. And obviously he's in a different place. He's going to occupy a different place to it than some of the other, you know, Indiana legends, because a lot of those guys, you know, hung banners. And I'd be surprised if he does. I mean, even if he stays for a fourth year, I don't know that we're talking on that scale with these guys. You might, depending on, you know, what Jalen Hood-Schifino looks like and what, you know, Caleb Banks looks like and that sort of things, and who else sticks around. Does Xavier Johnson, you know, play what would be a fifth year of college? You know, those sorts of things. I mean, I think Trayce Thompson has an option at a sixth, but if those guys play, who do you lose? You know, you're obviously dealing with all these eligibility and roster issues when it comes to the COVID year, and figuring all that out. But if he leaves after this year, you know, I mean, he matters in the lore. It's kind of unique because he's going to be one of those guys that, you know, never plays on a title team, you know, probably doesn't win a Big Ten championship, probably, you know, like they'd need a good break and a heck of a second round game to get to a Sweet 16. So like some of those things aren't there, but, you know, his production numbers are going to be up there. And, you know, what happens long-term with Mike Woodson's tenure will come back to Trayce Jackson-Davis. It is a guy you'll tie back to in a way that maybe like a Steve Downing mattered for Bobby Knight. Downing played on better teams and went further and had bigger numbers. But guys sort of at the beginning of that Knight era that weren't around for 76, you know, like he is like, there are guys that you can point back to and say that this team is here because of that guy. You know, that because that guy bought in, he got things started, and 2, 3, 4 years down the road, this is where they are. And it might not have been that way if that guy didn't buy into the system. Trayce is going to be somebody like that. And his full legacy, I don't think, becomes known until Mike Woodson's, you know, full coaching legacy becomes known. I mean, like you'll be able to tie a lot back of Mike Woodson's success to Trayce Jackson-Davis.
And that's the last thing I wanted to touch on for basketball talk is just what Mike Woodson has done here so quickly. I know he wasn't the choice a lot of people maybe expected when the position came open, but to see him just so quickly adapt to the college game, to get this program turned around. And I really think just the excitement he's kind of immediately pumped back into this program has been huge. You saw it, I mean, in that Purdue game, obviously, and have seen it throughout the year. I mean, how almost unexpected has this season been for Mike Woodson?
I mean, I'm not going to go and call it completely unexpected yet. I mean, obviously, I think the Purdue win in particular stands out as a wow moment. You know, I do think you looked at this group and said, you know, first of all, I think you looked at last year's team and said that should have been a tournament team. It shouldn't have been that bad. And so the pieces that were that stayed over, plus the transfer portal guys he got, plus Bates, you were like, you know, this should be a team that gets in. And maybe it should be a team that gets in comfortably. There's still more. And I mean, I would say I think he's ahead of the game. I don't know that it's like wildly drastically ahead. I mean, I think there's still a lot more we have to see about this season before we kind of render, you know, solid verdicts. But I think that if you, and like in terms of like where would I have expected them to be, it kind of depends on when you would have asked me in sort of the initial transition weeks. Obviously, I think it was a big, like he kept making smart decisions out of the gate. And Indiana, I think, kept making smart decisions out of the gate. I think to go get a Thad Matta to kind of put some backing there to say, we're going to get a guy to be part of this who's been around and won as a head coach at the college level. He's not going to be on the bench, but he's going to be close to it. He's going to be somebody that Woodson can go to for, advice and guidance. Then to keep an assistant like Kenya Hunter. And he had Mike Roberts on staff before Mike, decided to go to Cincinnati to follow Wes Miller, which is really, one of his guys or his guy, really. I mean, they got a lot done together at UNC Greensboro. So, I mean, they're very closely bounded. But keeping around guys that have been on Miller's staff, and not just them, but like a Brian Walsh, other sort of lower level guys, not deciding to, rip the joint apart, from the studs and say, well, there's nobody in here that I can use, to say, hey, you know what? You guys have been around, you know what you're doing. I'm not going to act like I know who my video coordinator needs to be, at the college level. I'm just going to roll with what's here. I'm going to trust that you guys know what you're doing. And getting a Dane Fife, who wasn't necessarily a guy that he'd cross paths with a lot, but was an Indiana guy, and he knew that. I think there was a lot of smart calls to put him in a position to make the transition easier on himself. And I think required him to, operate with less of an ego. And I think that's impressive. And so at that point, when you start to see what he was doing there, like I think Trayce Jackson-Davis's press conference, when he said he was coming back, really gave you a sense that it was that he was connecting in the right way, or in an interesting and a productive way. To be able to say, all right, to tell Trayce, this is where you need to get better. Like this is, I'm not going to, I'm going to tell you I need you, but in the same way, I'm going to tell you that you're not good enough right now for the NBA. And you need to know that. And you need to hear that from me. And you need to hear how I'm going to make you better. Again, just because of the way he handled a lot of those things, got a sense that it was going to be pretty good. And you keep hearing good things. I mean, like you don't want to get ahead of your skis. I mean, you don't want to say, okay, well, they're, a step away from being a Big Ten championship team, but he's done a good job of connecting with guys where they are. He's done a good job, I think, of building real confidence in a guy like Rob Finney. That's something Archie Miller tried to do for years. He really wanted to. It's not something that he didn't know was an important thing, but, Mike's managed to get across to Finney in a way that he had. Xavier Johnson, kind of keeping him together. You're gonna look back at that booing moment at the crossroads and how Mike guided him through that as a really big key for this season. Like that mattered to X a lot. And so, that's a big reason why he is where he is, because for Mike to tell him personally, but then to go out and publicly say, none of this, no, like, don't mess with my guys. I will tell them when they screwed up, and it's a big deal because look, this Indiana fan base is opinionated, it believes in itself. To its credit, I learn basketball things from fans all the time. Like I don't want to sit here and knock the basketball IQ of the Indiana fan base. It is very, very, very high. But because it is very high, they have confidence in themselves to speak out loud when they think somebody is screwing up and be very, very vocal about it. And Mike's sort of getting that thing across of like, all right, whatever. I know you guys are smart and all, but it's my team. I'll tell my guy when he screwed up. You don't need to be the guy that tells my guy when I screw up. When he screws up, I'll tell him. I want him to do certain things. That's my job, not yours. That's a big moment. That is one that I think is going to that mattered to X, and I think everybody else noticed it. And so things like that, I think, explain why they are where they are right now. And again, I think there's bumps in the road to come. As much as everybody was like ready to crown Mike Woodson king of all of Hoosier land after Purdue, like everybody was equally angry when Michigan blew their doors off. And, before that, they go on the road to no environment and lose at Penn State. I mean, there are rocky roads to come. People are going to be saying, oh, my, like you guys crowned them too fast. You guys this, that, and whatever. So we got to be careful not to do that. But all the same, I think when you look at the whole of where this is going and the progress and kind of the big picture stuff, those are some things that stand out to me as to why it seems to be at least a little bit ahead of schedule.
I want to talk to you guys real quick about an app everybody needs to be using called the GetUpside app. We all have to buy gas. We all complain about the gas prices every time we do it as well. GetUpside is a free app Download in the App Store, Google Play, that helps you get cash back on each purchase of gas. Simply use a promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first fill up, cash back. But you don't have to pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using GetUpside. It was really simple. I've used it a couple times. You just download the app, find the gas station you're going to, claim the offer, head to the gas station, check in, fill up. The cash will go back into your account. For me, it's taken about 24 hours each time. It's simple to cash out at any time you want, whether to your bank account, to PayPal, to a gift card, to Amazon, or to other places. There's no catch. It's just a simple free app to use. Download it today. GetUpside. Use that promo code SCORE to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's promo code SCORE on the GetUpside app. Yeah, and this, if nothing else, the program is certainly trending upward and in a really good place right now. And he's a big part of that. Trayce is, everybody, seemingly everybody with the roster right now is a part of that. Obviously, they have had the week off after that Maryland game, and IU football has taken the opportunity to make all sorts of noise during that week. Obviously, the big news is losing running back coach, associate head coach Deland McCullough, but kind of simultaneously with that, all three of his sons are staying. So kind of a two-pronged question. How much does losing him as a coach hurt, and how much does it help or kind of positively impact the program for all three sons to remain at IU?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and I want to see it all play out. I mean, it's pretty wild to me that they all made this announcement within 24 hours.
Same, yeah.
And so I like long-term effect. I want to, ask me in a year if they're all still there. And because I guess I was most surprised by Daeh. I think that's how you say his name, is Daeh McCullough, the one who's not signed. Because I wasn't sure what Dasan was going to do, because he's already on campus and he's got an NLI, and he would have needed Indiana to give him a waiver for him to be able to go. And obviously Deland could just enter the portal if he wanted to. Now, that being said, he's a Miami, Ohio transfer. Was Notre Dame going to want him? You got to ask yourself some question there. Though he'd only been playing on special teams. Is Marcus Freeman, offering Deland, the second a scholarship? I don't know. But all the same, I mean, Daeh and Dasan could clearly go to Notre Dame, without any problem. So for them to come out and say, we're definitely staying in Indiana, I think is really important. It obviously helps IU's cause, again, at least for a year, I presume. Again, you never know if Dasan plays for a year and says, man, I really want to go. That the point was to come play with Dad on staff. I want to go play with Dad on staff. I mean, he had his own reasons. I mean, I talked to him, right before signing day to really get into his sort of thinking and everything. And, he likes what they do on defense. And even though there's a new defensive coordinator, he likes what Tom Allen does. He likes the freedom it provides. I mean, he's such a multi-talented guy. He makes you think of, not at that level, but like Micah Parsons, is a 6'5" guy who can rush. He can play, regular, Mike or Stinger linebacker. You can move him back to safety. He's got coverage skills. He's got edge rush skills. I mean, he's just a heck of an athlete, for this sort of modern game. And he's a big deal by himself, just keeping him in the fold. But, if I'm sure that Notre Dame would be happy to have him and would have a place to find, would be able to find a place that he could play football for them. So I'll be interested to see if that sticks around, but still, at least for now, to make it feel like the sky isn't falling, it's a big deal. And so at least if you keep him around for a year and you at least get to see what he can do, and get some plays out of him, then it's like, okay, like it keeps that class together. He was a big part of that, of making sure nobody jumped ship, while they were 2-10. So that I think is important. As far as Deland, the coach, I mean, it obviously, I think, does something to the perception of the program, and that matters in recruiting going forward. Because, here's a guy that you got back from the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, he was part of this wave of really good news for, like, look at Indiana football. Oh my God, they're a top 15, they were top 12 in 2020, and they're top, going into the season, top 25 and, 17 overall. in 2021, and then to go 2-10, it adds to the feeling of the bottom is falling out. And, that this notion that Indiana was rising to become one of the powers in the Big Ten East and, was going to be nationally competitive. Obviously, it's one of those things that takes a shot, because it's Deland McCullough saying, I can't pass on Notre Dame, from Indiana. Like, that's just too good a job. And, if Indiana was going to be a steady top 25 program for a while, and McCullough had been a piece of it, building up that way. I mean, he was like, he wanted to be part of it going well. And the fact that he's off that ship in a year and saying, well, no, I'm going to go coach for Marcus Freeman. It takes some shine off, and there was already a lot of shine taken off by 2-10 in the first place. So in terms of perception, it's rough. I mean, I think they can obviously find a good running backs coach. I think Deland is a very good running backs coach. But he had a mixed bag really in 2021, because you had, I thought Stephen Carr performed pretty well, but he didn't, turn himself into an all Big Ten player or anything like that. He was steady, but he wasn't spectacular. You can blame that on the offensive line, but I mean, I thought Carr was good and, great kid to talk to and everything like that, but didn't blow everybody's doors off. And then beyond him, everybody that lost out to him in the competition transfers, Tim Baldwin Jr., Samson James, both transferred. David Ellis was part of that, but is always kind of going to be a gadget guy, and he gets hurt. And so your next guys down the line are walk-ons. And I thought they played well. I mean, you got to give credit to Davion over and Poindexter for turning into a very, not valid, but sturdy player. I mean, I think he became a playmaking guy. Chris Childers was solid. Charlie Spiegel had some good moments. But the fact that you were down to walk-ons, okay, there's obviously some flip sides to that. So, and then he goes recruits a whole bunch of pieces, transfers, Sean Shivers and Josh Henderson. But those guys have only produced so much. I mean, like, you look at this running back room and you don't know what you're getting this season. There are some good looking, freshman guys. They got Jabron Payne, the kid Jalen Lucas from New Orleans. He got some impressive work done on the recruiting trail, but you're looking at freshmen, sophomores, and David Holloman and Trent Howland. You only know so much about them at this point. Some transfers, Sean Shivers is a scat back type guy. Josh Henderson barely produced at North Carolina. So you have no idea who your starting running back is in 2022. And it's going to be a new running backs coach. It's going to have to figure all that out. McCullough has a way he likes to build a running back room. Now he's built it for somebody who, is going to come in not knowing what his plans were. Allen might tell him, that might help, but he's not going to be the same guy. And so it's tough from a pure X's and O's, development perspective. It's tough from a perceptive standpoint. I mean, it's survivable. It's still a running backs coach. It's not the same as even losing a coordinator, much less a head coach. But it stings. It definitely stings for Indiana. Again, from a perception thing is a really big piece, because I think them getting a guy who would, won a Super Bowl, been a part of another one, to come back to college and take this job and then leave it. It just takes some shine off for where Indiana football seemed to be going.
Yeah, and there was kind of the sense that the sky is falling just because of the mass amount of turnover this offseason, whether it was the coaches with 2 new coordinators coming in, whether it was, seemingly across the line, or maybe except for the line itself offensively, everybody it kind of is new. And is there a root cause to that? Is it going 2-10? Is it just the nature of kind of modern football now?
I presume that's obviously a big piece to it. And I think everybody else had their individual reasons of feeling like some guys felt like they needed another, just needed new surroundings. And you could see why. If you look at every individual case, like Michael Penix, guy, what was that, 4 season-ending injuries?
Yep.
I think he was just like, man, I got to get out of here. This is, it's house of horrors for me. I need to be someplace else because it just keeps going wrong. And I think Michael Penix loved Indiana, and he obviously won a bunch of games. And I think it was just like, he felt like it was time to move on and get a fresh start, because my God, just every year, every single, that guy played 4 seasons and never played a bucket game.
Yep.
And even though there wasn't one in 2020, he would not have played it if there was. And so he just never made it to the end of the year and had some spectacular moments, but never really seemed to be, have it together in 2021. So you kind of see, he is the most high profile, loss, But, I think a lot of people like, even I think Indiana fans were sort of ready for him to move on and just say, Mike, maybe you need to get out of here, because I don't think we can watch this happen to you again. Just the incredible heartbreak, and maybe it's just time for somebody else to be in that spot. But other pieces, a Miles Marshall never, didn't produce this year the way that he was supposed to. They had some other guys, obviously Freifogel and Carr were out of eligibility. Hendershot, has enough reason to jump at the NFL shot now. I don't know that he's going to be a high draftee, but he'll at least end up in somebody's camp. I don't know that it does him any good to stay a sixth year. I don't think that would have made any difference for him, especially with, presumably a new quarterback, a new coordinator. This is a jump on, strike while the iron's hot moment for him. So with those losses, Matt Bjorson, a blocking tight end, maybe you can find more time elsewhere. But it's AJ. I think that's the one position that you look at and say, well, there's a guy that's going to be the guy. AJ Barner seems like the obvious choice to be next in line. But you're right, running back or wide receiver, you really don't know. I think it matters that DJ Matthews is sticking around. And deciding that he's going to go at it and rehab from his ACL. Because I think he was going to be one of the most important offensive players before he got injured. But no, I think obviously, there's individual reasons and there's 2 and 10. I don't know that. I think when something like this happens, like there's this notion that there is, something rotten in Denmark or whatever, if you will. And if you were spending time in the locker room, you would realize that everybody hates each other. And it's just, like LEO is a total lie. And, like everybody's at each other's throat and everybody just has to get out of it. And I don't know if that's the case. I didn't get that impression. But we're not allowed, in the locker room, we're not allowed to just go hang out with those guys, and get a sense of, okay, like how much, camaraderie was lost, or how much of it is just the feeling of like, oh my God, we're 2 and 10. But they didn't get off the canvas, at the end of the year. Like you have to say that is once they took a couple of shots, the last 3 games, there wasn't a whole lot of fight left. Like they had sort of, so, that's obviously not good signs. I don't know, if somebody didn't like this coordinator or somebody didn't like that guy or somebody didn't like this coach or these players didn't like each other, I don't know about any of that. And nobody is going to tell us, as far as that's concerned. But, when you lose football games, people tend not to want to stick around. But I think, Allen, I think looked at it as, there needs to be new blood. And I think that makes sense. I think a lot, I think the one thing that was said, about, from a chemistry standpoint, I guess, that a couple people brought up was that there was a sense that because all these guys were coming back, they were just going to naturally start at a baseline of like 6 and 6, that like, they didn't have to push themselves past their previous limits to be that successful, that they could sort of pencil in 8 wins or something like that to start. Like they were going to be that good, and it was just taking it up a notch because all these dudes were coming back, and there wasn't a sense of urgency, and that cost them. That's sort of, I think, something that's been explained. And it's hard to tell, okay, who didn't play with a sense of urgency? Mike McFadden certainly did. And some of those other guys certainly did, but you could see some others maybe didn't. And so that, I think, ultimately just leads to some people just thinking, it's time for me to be someplace else. And, especially when you're talking about guys that had already been there for 4 years, and like, yeah, they had maybe 2 more years left because of COVID, but it was just like, all right, kind of done my time here. And, if I'm going to keep playing, if I'm going to stay in college, maybe I ought to go someplace else and go see what's, greener on the other side, see what this is like, get an idea of being in someone else's system. But, kind of felt like, hey, I promised 4, I gave 4, I'll look for someplace else where I can make an impact, or, someone saying, hey, and I'm sure in some of those cases it was Tom Allen saying, hey man, we're going to recruit over you. We're like, you're behind the depth chart now. And ultimately, we don't necessarily see you, being, like you've got a chance. You'll be evaluated. You have an opportunity, but if you're asking us where you stand right now, like we are going to go, we don't view you as a definitive starter, and we're going to go try to get players who are better than you. Mm-hmm. So, do with that what you will, and probably let some guys to decide it was time to move on. So there's a lot of pieces there, but the bottom line driving force is 2 and 10 drives a lot of people out, at the end of the day. And sometimes that's the coach's call and sometimes that's the player's call. But ultimately, when you go 2 and 10, generally people don't want a sequel of that.
You don't typically run it back after 2-10.
No, you don't run it back after 2-10.
Yeah.
0-9 in the Big Ten.
Yeah. So I've said a couple times that I would imagine this is the last we'll talk about IU football until the spring, but they keep making
You don't know
news.
that.
Yeah, they keep making news, so
Mhm.
I'm not even going to make that promise anymore.
There's
but
more to come. There's a running backs coach hire to make.
Yeah.
And there is certainly more info to be had, but there's a lot. I mean, I think it's going to be an interesting spring. Obviously, you're going to
Very
have a pretty
much.
wide open quarterback competition with Basilak, with Tuttle, with McCullough. I presume Dexter Williams will make his presence known, and the Sorsby kid is interesting that they signed today. So it is going to be worth checking out.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an exciting spring for maybe different reasons than last year, but nonetheless, it'll be interesting to follow this program as they try to come back up after a brutal season last year. That is all we have today. I know this ran longer than I said, but thank you a ton for coming on today again and talking about everything going on with IU athletics right now, because there is certainly a lot going on. So thanks a ton for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jacob. Really appreciate it, man.
Yep. Thanks again to Dustin for joining us today. A huge thanks for stopping by and having that conversation with us. We'll be back tomorrow to preview the Illinois game and hopefully another big win for the Hoosiers. Now, for your second listen today, head on over to the Locked On Bets podcast, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Appreciate all the love you guys have given us. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. Leave a quick rating. Helps us out a ton. Most importantly, though, guys, have a great Thursday. Stay safe with Snowmageddon going on out there. And Elio.